Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. We have a Christmas Eve special episode for everyone. Today, we are going to explore the vanishing act of 5 children from a small West Virginia town, an event that casts a long, cold shadow over the holiday season.
It really does. It remains one of the most haunting and truly ambiguous cases in American history. It's a tragedy that's just wrapped in suspicion, entirely because the official conclusion hinges on something that feels like a physical impossibility.
Yeah, that's the word for it. Impossible.
Today we're walking through the mystery of the Sodder children, who disappeared from their Fayetteville home right on Christmas Eve, 1945.
And just imagine the emotional whiplash of that night for the family and for you listening now thinking about the season. It's December 24th, 1945. World War II just ended a few months ago.
Right. There's a sense of hope in the country.
Exactly. And the Sodder family, George, Jenny, and 10 children in total, are in their big, bustling home. They're a really well-respected, successful, middle-class immigrant family. They're just, getting ready for Christmas morning.
But then shortly after midnight, around 1:00 a.m., that normalcy just shatters. A massive fire tears through the house.
George and Jenny, the parents, they manage to escape. They get out with 4 of their children. Their youngest, Sylvia, who was only 2, 17-year-old Marion, and the 2 older sons, John and George Jr.
John was 23, actually just back from serving in the Army, and George Jr., who they called Ted, was 16.
But 5 children, all of them sleeping upstairs, they couldn't get out. 14-year-old Maurice, 12-year-old Martha, 9-year-old Louie, 8-year-old Jenny, and little 5-year-old Betty. The initial assumption, the horrifying, logical assumption, was that they were trapped, that they perished in the fire.
But here is the central paradox. This is the undeniable fact that turns this awful tragedy into a mystery that spans decades. When the house burned completely to the ground and first responders finally arrive hours later to go through the rubble, they found absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
No bones, no teeth, no skeletal fragments, no physical evidence whatsoever that 5 human beings had been consumed in those flames.
How does a fire consume 5 people, including a 14-year-old boy who's almost a man, and leave literally no trace behind?
It doesn't.
That is the question George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives trying to answer. They were convinced their children were abducted, not burned. So today, our mission is to really examine that initial tragedy, scrutinize the shocking red flags that suggested foul play, and analyze why the local authorities seem to go to such extraordinary lengths to enforce a story that just defied all scientific evidence.
So to really unpack this, you have to start with George and Jenny Sodder themselves. Who were they? George, whose original name was Giorgio Sodder, he immigrated from Sardinia, Italy, back in 1908.
And Jenny, also from Italy, came over as a toddler.
And they were, for all intents and purposes, the American immigrant success story. George built this thriving local trucking company, hauling coal and freight. They were prominent, respected, a successful family in a small Appalachian town.
But success, and maybe more importantly, strong political opinions, well, that can breed resentment.
And George's opinions were very strong. The sources are so clear on this. He was intensely publicly outspoken against the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini,
who had just been executed that same year, 1945.
Exactly. So this put him at odds with some people in the local Italian immigrant community who, might have still harbored some fascist sympathies or at least thought George was being too loud about it.
This context is so crucial. In post-WWII America, anti-fascist feelings were high, of course, but inside these tight-knit immigrant communities, those old political loyalties could run really, really hot.
George's outspokenness was a liability, and it seems to have led directly to some pretty alarming warnings before the fire. Warnings that suggest a clear motive for some kind of retaliation.
Let's walk through those because they feel less like warnings and more like premeditation.
They do. The first major one involved an insurance salesman named Rosser Long. George turned him down on a pitch to raise his life insurance policy.
Okay, that sounds normal enough.
Well, Long allegedly became furious. Not just annoyed, but irate. And he reportedly issued this chilling threat. He warned that George's house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed.
Whoa. That's not a standard sales tactic.
Not at all. And here's the connection that makes it so sinister. Long's threat was explicitly tied to George's dirty remarks about Mussolini.
So it was political.
It was political. And Long, it turns out, was also an associate of a man named Fenzo Genitolo. And Janatola was George's former business partner.
Okay, now we're getting into a financial angle.
Exactly. Janatola was reportedly upset that George had broken off their partnership to start his own very successful trucking company. Janatola had co-signed the home loan, and critically, he was the beneficiary on the existing $1,500 home insurance policy.
And the private detective the Sodders hired later, C.C. Tinsley, he confirmed that Janatola raised that policy amount to $1,750 without George knowing right before the fire.
So you connect those dots. You've got Janatola with a business grievance and a financial motive. You have his associate, Long, making political threats that specifically mention the house and the children.
You're starting to see a deliberate plot take shape, not some random electrical fire.
And the really awful part is that Rosser Long, the man who made the threat, he later served on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire was an accident.
You're kidding me. That's the integrity of the investigation was just gone before it even started.
Completely compromised. But the warnings weren't just verbal. The family also reported some really odd surveillance-type events right before Christmas.
Right, the stranger who showed up.
Yes. A few months before the fire, a man visits the house, says he's looking for hauling work, but he seemed way more interested in the electrical system. He points to George's 2 fuse boxes and says, so chillingly, this is going to cause a fire someday.
Which George just brushed off because he was meticulous. He just had the wiring checked by the power company. They said it was perfectly fine.
Right. And those 2 fuse boxes were likely for a new electric stove, which actually suggests the system was robust, not faulty.
And then there was the man in the car.
Yeah. In the week leading up to Christmas, the older Sodder boys noticed a man just parked along U.S. Highway 21, watching the younger kids come home from school, day after day.
That's classic reconnaissance. Someone is learning their patterns, learning who the targets are. That points to planning, not some random accident.
It absolutely does.
So if the whole official story of an accidental fire is already on shaky ground because of these threats, then let's look at the night itself. The sheer number of failures, both human and mechanical, it's just staggering. It's like a perfect storm of obstacles designed to make sure a rescue would fail.
The night started off normally enough. The 5 missing kids, Maurice, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, they were allowed to stay up late. Christmas Eve excitement.
As long as they did their chores, right? Lock the doors, close the blinds, turn off the lights.
Exactly. They were last seen downstairs around 11:30 p.m. But then, around 12:30 a.m., Jenny, the mother, wakes up. She answers the phone.
And it's this very strange wrong number call.
A woman on the other end with a weird laugh, asking for someone Jenny didn't know. Jenny said she could hear talking and loud laughing in the background, like from a party or a bar.
So was this a distraction or maybe a signal to someone that the house was, buttoned up for the night?
It's hard to say. But after she hangs up, Jenny notices a critical detail. The lights downstairs were still on, and the front door was unlocked. The kids hadn't done their chores.
So she locks up and goes back to bed, probably thinking it was just a prank call.
Right. But just before she falls asleep, she hears a loud bang on the roof and then a rolling sound.
This wasn't just the house settling.
No. And it was corroborated. A local bus driver later claimed he saw people throwing balls of fire onto the Sodder's roof right around 1:80 a.m.
So an incendiary device, a Molotov cocktail or something.
The family thought it might have been what they called a pineapple bomb, a kind of crude explosive from the war. Whatever it was, it points directly to a rapid, intentional fire starting on the roof, not a slow electrical short in a wall.
And then around 1 a.m., Jenny wakes up again, this time to the smell of smoke. The fire is already raging in George's office, the very room with the only phone downstairs,
instantly cutting off any chance of calling for help from inside.
George, Jenny, and the 4 other children, Sylvia, Marion, John, and Ted, they scramble out. John and Ted, the older boys, said their hair was singed as they ran down the stairs. The fire was moving that fast.
And John, the serviceman, he immediately told police he thought it was arson. The feeling of foul play was there from the very first moments.
And crucially, they all said the lights were still on. The Christmas lights, the downstairs lights, they were still lit up as they fled.
Which completely contradicts the faulty wiring theory. A short like that would almost certainly cut the power to the house immediately.
So then, George starts this frantic rescue attempt, but he's met with just this catastrophic series of obstacles.
One after another. He first tries the internal stairs to the second floor.
Already engulfed in flames. No way up. So his only hope is the windows. He runs outside for the ladder he always keeps propped against the house.
And it's gone.
Not just moved, gone.
It was later found 70 feet away, thrown over an embankment. I mean, that detail right there, that's not an accident. That is deliberate removal. Someone knew that ladder was the only way up.
So desperate, George turns to his trucks, his two big coal trucks. He's thinking he can pull one up to the house, climb on top, get to the windows.
And both of them, which had been running perfectly the day before, refused to start.
The official explanation was that he, choked them too hard in his panic.
For two heavy-duty commercial trucks to fail at the exact same moment, it stretches belief to the breaking point. The family was convinced they'd been tampered with.
But the ultimate failure, really, was the institutional one. Marion runs to a neighbor's, but they can't get the telephone operator. Finally, someone has to drive into town to physically find the fire chief, F.J. Morris.
And the delay is just staggering. When he's finally told the Sodder house is on fire, with children trapped inside, Chief Morris allegedly gives this unbelievably casual reply, "We know about it," and makes no move to rush to the scene.
So the fire department, which was a volunteer force, finally arrives between 8:00 and 9:00 a.m.
7 to 8 hours after the fire started. The house, which had probably burned itself out in under an hour, was just a smoking basement full of ash. It had completely vanished.
That delay wasn't just an inconvenience. It basically guaranteed there would be no real investigation.
It was a foundational failure. The scene was destroyed, and the immediate assumption of death was just convenient.
Okay, so let's unpack that aftermath. Because if the fire was suspicious, the so-called investigation that followed was, frankly, a scandal. It's just riddled with conflicts of interest and what looks like either baffling incompetence or something worse.
The authorities rushed to judgment almost immediately. They held an inquest, concluded the fire was accidental faulty wiring, and issued 5 death certificates. But you have to look at who was on that inquest.
The coroner's jury.
It was made up of 5 locals, and they had significant personal or business ties to Finzo Genitolo.
George's former partner, the guy with the insurance policy.
The very same. And we have to emphasize this. That 5-person jury included Rosser Long.
The insurance salesman who threatened that the house would go up in smoke and the children would be destroyed.
That's him. I mean, that's not just a conflict of interest. That legally invalidates the entire finding. An objective investigation would have thrown that out immediately. The fact that it was accepted just shows the pressure to close this case fast.
And the faulty wiring theory kept getting contradicted by physical evidence. They claimed the phone line burned through in the fire.
Right. But later it was confirmed the line had been cut 14 feet up the pole. You'd need a ladder to do that.
The same ladder that went missing from the side of the house?
Exactly. And a local bar owner, a guy named Lonnie Johnson, he actually admitted to cutting it.
He admitted it? What was his explanation?
It's just unbelievable. He claimed he thought it was the power line and that cutting it would stop the fire.
That makes 0 sense. A phone line looks nothing like a power line, and cutting it would do nothing. And where did he get a ladder?
Nobody asked. And to make it even more suspicious, this same Lonnie Johnson was caught stealing some of George's equipment chain hoists from the barn during or right after the fire.
And what was his punishment?
The authorities accepted his story about the phone line, and they fined him just $25 for the theft.
$25 for theft and evidence tampering at the scene of a tragedy with 5 dead children.
It just speaks volumes about the priorities of local law enforcement. They wanted a neat story, and they just weren't interested in questioning anyone who might disrupt it.
But the official misconduct, it really peaks with the fire chief, F.J. Morris.
Oh, absolutely. This is maybe the most bizarre part of the whole story. Remember, he showed up hours late. But years later, in 1947, he makes a confession to a local reverend.
A confession?
He admitted that while he was sifting through the ashes, he found what he thought was a human heart. But instead of bagging it as evidence, instead of telling the family or the coroner, he hid it in a dynamite box and buried it in the rubble.
He did what? Why?
His reasoning was that he wanted to find some remains to give the family closure, to stop them from asking questions. So the Sodders, with their PI, they persuade Morris to show them where he buried it. They dig up the box, and they take the organ to a local funeral director. The verdict: it was beef liver. untouched by fire, almost certainly planted there by Morris himself.
He planted fake evidence to try and shut down a grieving family.
Just a shocking level of deception. And it all seems to point to this desperate need to control the narrative. When George Sodder wrote to J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI and they offered to help, the local Fayetteville authorities turned them down flat, said it was a local matter.
They actively refused help from the FBI.
They did, which brings us right to the core of this whole case, the absolute total lack of remains. This is where the parents' relentless search finds its strongest scientific footing.
Right. Jenny Sodder just couldn't accept that her children had vaporized. She started doing her own experiments.
Morbid experiments, but grounded in logic. She would burn animal bones, chicken, beef in their stove, and every single time she was left with charred, identifiable bone fragments.
She then went and talked to crematorium experts.
And they confirmed it. They told her their ovens run at about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, and even then, they don't completely destroy human bones. The remaining fragments have to be mechanically crushed into what we call ash.
And the Sodder house was a wood frame house that burned for maybe 45 minutes, tops.
The science was clear. To completely incinerate 5 bodies, including the dense skull and bones of a 14-year-old, would require a fire far hotter and far longer than any house fire could produce. There should have been skeletons.
This scientific impossibility is what led to the big 1949 excavation.
Yes, 4 years after the fire, George and Jenny hired a respected pathologist from Washington, D.C., Dr. Oscar B. Hunter, to do a proper archaeological dig of the site.
And they found something. They found 4 vertebrae.
The only potential human remains ever recovered. They sent them straight to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis.
And the Smithsonian's report was just a monumental blow to the official story.
A complete game changer. Dr. Marshall Newman at the Smithsonian concluded, first, the vertebrae showed absolutely no evidence of ever being exposed to fire. They were unburned.
Unburned.
Second, they belonged to an individual who was between 16 and 22 years old. The oldest missing child, Maurice, was only 14 and a half.
So not only were they not burned, they were from the wrong person.
Exactly. Dr. Newman noted an amazing scarcity of bones. He said he fully expected to find the full skeletons of the 5 children if they had died in that fire. The final conclusion was that the bones were probably just in the fill dirt that George had used to turn the basement into a memorial garden.
So all the scientific and forensic evidence was pointing in one direction.
Overwhelmingly, it strongly supported George and Jenny's belief. The children were not in the house. They had been abducted.
So if they were in the fire, the only other option is abduction, which brings the motive back into focus. This wasn't about insurance money. This was about revenge.
Revenge for George's anti-Mussolini statements, or some other plot by Fenzo Giannatolo. The threat from Rosser Long was specific: destruction of the house and the children. This implies they were either taken right before the fire or grabbed in the chaos.
And the family chased down every single sighting for years. Witnesses said they saw the children being driven away in a car the night of the fire.
And one of the most compelling early sightings came about a week later. A woman in a Charleston hotel saw the pictures in the paper and contacted the Sodders. She said she saw 4 of the 5 kids.
4 of them.
3 boys and 1 girl, she said. They were with 2 men and 2 women, all of whom seemed to be Italian. She said when she tried to talk to the children, the men became hostile and started speaking rapidly in Italian to shut her down. The group checked out early the next morning.
So if she saw 4 of them, that would leave 1 unaccounted for. Probably Maurice, the oldest.
That's the speculation, that maybe Maurice, being 14, fought back. Maybe he was injured or separated from the others. It's logistically so difficult to kidnap 5 children without a struggle.
And the family never gave up. They kept raising the reward, eventually to $10,000, which was a fortune back then.
George even drove all the way to New York City once because he saw a photo of a schoolgirl he was convinced was his daughter, Betty. Tragically, he was turned away by the girl's parents.
But the most famous and just agonizing lead came much later, in the late 1960s.
Almost 25 years later, Jenny receives an envelope in the mail, postmarked from Kentucky. Inside is a photograph of a young man, probably in his mid-20s.
And the resemblance to their missing son, Louis, was uncanny.
It really was. The same dark, curly hair, the straight nose, and this very distinctive upward tilt of his left eyebrow that Louis had. The parents were absolutely convinced it was him all grown up.
And there was a note on the back.
A cryptic handwritten note. It said, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill little boys, 890132 or 35.
So it uses his name, but who is Brother Frankie?
Yeah.
None of the Sodder kids were named Frankie.
No. Which suggests maybe a new identity, a new family, and then that bizarre alphanumeric code at the end, an address, a serial number. No one knows.
His photo must have just reignited everything for them.
Completely. They hired a private detective right away, sent him to Kentucky to find the man in the picture.
And this is where it gets even darker.
The private detective went to Kentucky and was never heard from again. He just disappeared.
So you're left with two possibilities. Either he was silenced by someone powerful who was covering their tracks, or he just took the family's money and ran.
For the Sodders, it just confirmed their worst fears, that they were fighting something much bigger than just local incompetence.
And that really brings us to the core of this whole story, this decades-long battle between a family's intuition and belief and the deeply flawed story pushed by the authorities.
But what's so fascinating here is how the actual science, the real evidence, consistently supported the family's belief.
Exactly. The Smithsonian report finding unburned bones from the wrong person, the crematorium experts saying it was impossible. This gave George and Jenny the validation they needed. They weren't just grieving parents in denial, they were scientifically informed skeptics.
And you contrast their methods with the local officials. The officials are rushing the inquest, they're burying beef liver, they're refusing FBI help. The Sodders are hiring top pathologists, funding archaeological digs, and consulting the Smithsonian.
The cost, both emotional and financial, must have been just immeasurable. George spent the rest of his life, until he died in 1969, chasing down every single tip, never knowing.
And Jenny's dedication was so visual. She wore black every day until her death in 1989, a constant state of mourning. She refused to accept the death certificates and kept her room ready just in case they came home.
And of course, the billboard. The billboard on Route 16 in Fayetteville with the kids' pictures and the reward. It stood there for decades, a constant public symbol of their unresolved grief, a reminder to the whole town that the truth was never found.
And that trauma was passed down. Their youngest daughter, Sylvia, the one who was only 2 during the fire, she dedicated her life to the case, continuing the search well into this century.
So why does this case endure? Why do we still talk about the Sodder children?
I think it's the power of that total, complete ambiguity. If they had found just one bone fragment that was confirmed to be one of the children, it would be a solved, albeit tragic case.
But the complete absence of remains.
Combined with the mountain of suspicious incidents, the threats, the surveillance, the missing ladder, the cut phone line, the beef liver, it means the case was never built on a foundation of fact. It was built on the shaky ground of official incompetence, or, more chillingly, a deliberate cover-up.
And you can't ignore the small-town politics. The web of connections between the business rival, the insurance agent on the jury, the prosecutor, the fire chief, they all knew each other.
They were all intertwined. The prosecutor reportedly admitted he couldn't question certain people because they were his personal friends. When the people in charge of the investigation are protecting the very people who should be suspects, a family has no choice but to believe in a conspiracy.
So the legacy of this case isn't just about a fire. It's this American horror story about one family's fight against a system that seemed determined to force a false narrative on them.
It really is. It leaves us with this very chilling question to analyze.
The question isn't just if the children survived that night. It's why a group of local officials would fight so hard for so long, even planting fake evidence to dictate the story of a tragedy. Maybe the greatest tragedy here was the total destruction of the family's peace, whether by malice or by staggering incompetence. They were left fighting ghosts for 40 years.
And the parents' refusal to move on, symbolized by that huge billboard. That image is the final, unanswerable chapter of the Sodder family story.
Next on Threads of Truth, we travel to Wyoming's Wind River Range to examine the disappearance of Amy Bechtel, a runner who vanished during a solo jog, leaving behind a trail, a car, and questions that still echo through the mountains.
From all of us here, thank you for walking through this complex case with us today.
And wherever you are, we wish you a Merry Christmas.